Marvel's Spider-Man 3 has a big problem.
I missed the part where that's my problem.
Specifically a green one. Ever since Spider-Man PS4, fans have been praying for the day they get to run a fade with Norman Osborn as the iconic Green Goblin. But at this point, arguably the biggest Spider-Man villain might not even show up in the final game of the Insomniac Spider-Man trilogy.
You serious?
Don't worry, once again, I'm going to break it all down for you nice and easy. So if you enjoy this sort of content, hit the like button to help it grow. But if it wasn't for you, change it to a dislike. Without a doubt, when you think of Spider-Man villains, the first names that come to almost everyone's minds are Dr. Octopus, Venom, and Green Goblin. So far, Insomniac has delivered 2 of the 3 with mostly positive reviews, but fans are undeniably much more split on the portrayal of Venom than Dr. Octavius, as many prefer the classic Venom interpretation where Eddie Brock is the symbiote host and was nothing more than to destroy Spider-Man, rather than the Harry Osborn version who never stopped trying to hang out with his best friend even after being corrupted by the alien menace and threatening to give the entire world 19 inches. Insomniac's interpretation of the Spider-Man lore, for the most part, has been fantastic, despite the sky-high expectations, but the anticipation of Green Goblin is going to be a different beast. Many fans were introduced to the wall crawler through the brilliant portrayal of Norman Osborn by Willem the Goat in the classic Spider-Man 2 film, and have been anxiously waiting to see how Insomniac improves on the character, who has gotten Easter eggs in every game so far. But there are several challenges facing this character heading into Spider-Man 3. The biggest being that Insomniac's Norman Osborn isn't even a villain. At most, he's a very irresponsible, morally flexible billionaire who let his desire to cure cancer go too far. There was potential from the jump, as Norman came swaggering into Octavius' lab like he was Vince McMahon in Spider-Man PS4, throwing his money around to bully Otto into a corner that ultimately led him down the path of villainy. Even though Oscorp was ultimately responsible for the existence of the Devil's Breath bioweapon, Norman quickly took a back seat to the much more intimidating and competent Martin Lee, and eventually the diabolical Dr. Octopus, ending the game as another scared civilian Spider-Man had to rescue. Even the post-credit scene didn't show the makings of a mad and corrupt billionaire genius, but rather a scared father desperate to save his son. And this ultimately carried over into Spider-Man 2, where Norman was largely forgotten. Many speculated going into the game he would have a much bigger role than he actually got. With a good case to be made, he should have been Venom, or at the very least more involved with the Kraven the Hunter subplot. After all, Kraven's hunters had Oscorp tech. The symbiote that was keeping his son alive was taken by Spider-Man, who refused to give it back even as Harry looked like he was breaking bad. Yet through all this, Norman did nothing. One theory before the game was released was that Norman hired Kraven to track down the symbiote, but when we finally caught up with him once Venom was ready to be introduced, we learned Norman had just been growing a beard and trying to prepare a new treatment for his son. Norman, Peter's arguably greatest enemy, doesn't even express a real dislike for Spider-Man until the very end of the game, and even that felt forced. After all, they stopped Harry from taking over the world and even saved his life in the process. Why would this trigger Norman to hate Spider-Man and not him leaving Harry to suffer while swinging around the city with the symbiote destroying museums? It became more apparent that Norman really isn't about that life when he visited Dr. Octavius in prison to get Spider-Man's secret identity. Doc Ock's menacing presence and raw hatred easily put Norman in his place, and his tease for a final chapter suddenly seemed a lot more interesting than Norman's quest to dox Peter and Miles so he can file a lawsuit or something. With all the Easter eggs they dropped in this game, none of them are really pointing to a compelling portrayal of Norman Osborn as Green Goblin. One of the things that ultimately hurt Spider-Man 2 story-wise is that because Harry hadn't been established in the previous 2 games, they had to spend a big chunk of Spider-Man 2's story building that relationship to make the twist that was obviously coming more compelling. They reportedly weren't interested in a substantially longer game and didn't even have time for what they did deliver, with the creative director confirming cuts had to be made to the 3rd act. So far, Spider-Man 3 is introducing a 3rd spider hero in Silk, the Chameleon is active, and Dr. Octavius is either constructing Insomniac's version of the Gathering of the Five from the final chapter comic run, or they're about to do the Superior Spider-Man storyline where Dr. Octavius takes over Peter's body. With there already being 2 spider heroes, this is a very possible scenario, not to mention the potential presence of Carnage if his story doesn't end with the DLC. The main Goblin tease set up at the end of the last game, if it plays out, would have Harry getting the Goblin Serum instead of Norman, which could mean Insomniac is adapting the Hobgoblin arc instead. If Insomniac does go the Superior Spider-Man route, there's a potential of a Red Goblin appearance, assuming they bring back the Carnage symbiote, and Norman finally decides to get his hands dirty to stop Octavius in Spider-Man's body, resulting in Norman becoming the true threat to the city. But would fans really be satisfied with a Red Goblin versus Octavius showdown with the help of Miles and Silk, instead of Peter clashing with Norman? Based on how they reacted to the ending of Spider-Man 2, I doubt that very much, so Insomniac has their work cut out for them. I'm sure whatever is ultimately released will be extremely fun to play, but I think it would definitely be in the best interest of the game to take a more traditional approach and give fans that iconic showdown they've been dreaming of since 2018, and the groundwork for a lot of this can be laid down in the upcoming story DLC, which I talk about in the next video on screen.